Good afternoon. I'm Peter Saltonstall, President and CEO of NORD, and would like to welcome you to our webinar today. We're truly fortunate to have three special guests from the FDA and CDC with us today to talk about COVID vaccines. But before we start, I really want to thank them sincerely from all of us for all the work they've done as public servants over the last year to try to address all the problems that we've had with this COVID issue, if you will. So before we hear from them today, though, I also really want to thank our other co-sponsors that helped us put this on today. The ALS Association, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and Cystic Fibrosis. Without them, this would not be able to be put on today. So again, welcome. Look forward to having a robust discussion today with questions and answers. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to NORD's Vice President of Public Policy, Rachel Scherer. Rachel?
Thank you, Peter. And I just want to echo Peter's thanks to our FDA and CDC speakers for joining us today and to our partners in pulling this webinar together for today. The COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating for the economy and the health, both physical and emotional, for the US and the world over. But for the rare disease community, there have been unique challenges. NORD conducted a COVID-19 related survey of the rare disease community and found that 98% of the rare disease community is worried about the impact of COVID-19 on them. 69% of respondents have been concerned about shortages of critical medicines they need, as well as the PPE that they also need. 79% have had medical appointments canceled as a result of COVID-19. And yet, on a slightly brighter note, telemedicine has taken off in a significant way, with 83% of rare disease patients being offered a telephone or video call as an alternative to an in-office appointment. And 92% of those who had those telemedicine opportunities reported that that telehealth appointment was a positive experience. We're here today to discuss what is, for so many, the light at the end of this very long tunnel. As we have all heard, there are now 2 COVID-19 vaccines that have been developed and are authorized by the FDA, with hopefully more on the way. And while this is certainly an exciting time, it is also a time marked by so many questions and concerns about these vaccines, particularly for the rare disease community. So we are thrilled to have this opportunity to get answers to our most pressing questions directly from those most in the know at both FDA and CDC. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to turn it over to them for some opening remarks. First, Dr. Stephen Hahn was sworn in as the 24th Commissioner of Food and Drugs on December 17, 2019. Dr. Hahn is a physician, scientist, and healthcare leader with an extensive background in patient care, academic research, and executive leadership. Prior to joining the FDA, Dr. Hahn served as the Chief Medical Executive at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Dr. Hahn earned the rank of Commander in the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps while at the National Institute of Health National Cancer Institute, where he also completed a fellowship in medical oncology and a residency in radiation oncology. Next, Dr. Peter Marks, who is the Director of FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, or CBER, which is responsible for assuring the safety and effectiveness of biological products, including vaccines and cellular, tissue, and gene therapies. Dr. Marks joined the FDA in 2012 as Deputy Center Director for CBER and became Center Director in 2016. Dr. Marks is board certified in internal medicine, hematology, and medical oncology. Dr. Amanda Cohn currently serves as the Chief Medical Officer of the National Center for Immunizations and Respiratory Diseases and is the Executive Secretary of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices at the CDC. She previously served as the Deputy Director of the NCIRD's Immunization Services Division. Dr. Cohn came to the CDC in 2004 and is board certified in pediatrics. So let me first turn it over to Dr. Hahn, and then Dr. Marks, and then Dr. Cohn for opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Peter. Really appreciate you and all of the groups sponsoring today's session. It's so vitally important for us at FDA, and I'm sure Dr. Cohn feels the same way for CDC, to engage our partners, particularly partners who are on the front lines of addressing and dealing with the outbreak that we're seeing in front of us. I really look forward to the discussion we're going to have today and answering your questions. Now, FDA is an agency focused on using science to protect and promote the health and safety of the American public. We've been engaged in combating the COVID-19 pandemic from the beginning, now 11 months. It's been an incredibly painful period for all of us as Americans and around the world, and has caused significant medical, economic, and social disruption. And this is something that our career scientists see every day. They know this. They're also mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, grandparents, and they bring that knowledge of what's going on in their communities to the work that we do every day. And they have been tireless in their response. And I just want to make a brief shout out to them for their incredible diligence and hard work through this pandemic. As we've sought answers and worked with industry and academia to reach sound regulatory decisions, FDA's North Star has always been and will always be, I believe, the application of rigorous science and good data. We are committed to being as transparent as possible about the scientific basis for our emergency use authorizations, or EUAs, and I'm certainly happy to provide more background on that. One, because we think it's the right thing to do, but also to promote public confidence in our review process, and for Americans and the world to understand what the FDA's gold standard of authorization or approval really means. We've held 2 public advisory committee meetings, VRBAC, Vaccines and Biologic-Related Advisory Committee, for the 2 vaccine applications that we've received for EUAs. And these advisory committees consisted of external experts who reviewed the clinical data that our scientific experts looked at themselves and came to conclusions about. And then had a very vigorous public discussion. I know Dr. Cohn participated, and we appreciate her involvement in it as well. But Dr. Marks and his team not only reviewed in great detail volumes of data that would normally take us months to review, and did it in a matter of weeks, but held these VRBAC committee meetings with a summary of our assessment of the data. And I think that's particularly important to the group on the call today, because we will get asked, and we often get asked, and we will get asked, well, what about the vaccine with folks who have one disease versus another? And of course, it's really hard to study vaccine efficacy and safety in one rare disease, because we just don't have enough people with those diseases to come to significant conclusions. But there are really important parts of the data that we review that can help us potentially answer some of the questions that you ask. It is why our thorough review of the data and why our conclusions we feel is so important, and why we think that backs up the gold standard that FDA has come to be known around the world. But we also understand that public health professionals, you all stakeholders, the public, have to have full trust in FDA's review process and complete confidence in whatever products we approve or authorize. And we take that seriously. So part of that, of course, is engagements like this, but part of it also is being very clear about what we're going to use to authorize a particular medical product, following that and being transparent in that process. Each of you working within and living with rare diseases can play an important role in this regard. Your understanding of our processes, how it supports innovation, how FDA uses the best science possible, and frankly, your advocacy for the process, and when you agree for the products that we authorize, approve, can help go a long way to boost public understanding and confidence in these products. At the end of the day, for the COVID-19 vaccine, as we go forward with the vaccine campaign, we must achieve a time when we have herd immunity. That's going to be our way out of this pandemic. It's a race against time, because, of course, we're seeing a community spread significant in this country as well as around the world, and we are seeing some variants of the COVID-19 virus appear. So the sooner we can do this, the better, and part of that is making sure that we have as much vaccine confidence and less vaccine hesitancy. So before I turn it over to Dr. Marks, I just want to take a final moment to again thank the career staff at FDA and also CDC, Dr. Cohn, your agency as well. And This is at FDA, 17,000 plus career employees who have worked tirelessly to respond to this pandemic. And we now are on the precipice, I think, of being able to alter the course of this COVID-19 pandemic. And that is due in large part to the incredible work that the folks that Peter leads at the Center for Biologics Evaluation Research. Thank you for allowing me to make these comments, and I look forward to answering questions.
So this is Peter Marks from FDA. Thanks very much. Commissioner Hahn, thanks for all your leadership here. I thought I would say some words about the two emergency use authorizations that we have now for vaccines and a little bit about where we're heading. Emergency use authorization is something that we can use for products that are meant to address biologic threats, such as we are right now in a public health emergency. The emergency use authorization allows us to take a product that normally would have to go through a pretty long approval process and get it out there, usually with less evidence. In this case, though, for vaccines, because vaccines are being given to so many people and because safety is so important, we, in our guidance that we put out in June and in October of this year, made it clear that we were going to have a standard that was very similar in many ways to that which we would use for a vaccine that was approved through our normal pathway, the biologics license application. And so where we are now is we have two vaccines that have met the characteristics that we set forth in our guidance and that have come through and have received emergency use authorization. They have clear and compelling evidence that they're safe and effective. They were studied in large trials, one in 44,000 patients approximately, the other in 30,000 patients approximately, randomized trials. Both of these mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccines had efficacy in the 94 to 95% range. That is a very good vaccine effectiveness. That kind of efficacy is not the usual. For instance, influenza vaccine at its best usually has an efficacy of 70%, and that's usually against only one of the components in the vaccine. It's not against all of them. So that's a very good number. And what's even more impressive with this vaccine was that it had that 94, 95% effectiveness in various different subgroups, including different ethnic and minority groups, and also had very similar efficacy in older individuals, people over the age of 65. So the vaccine was effective. The safety profile was quite reasonable. There were there's some local discomfort associated with the vaccine, particularly after the second dose. There were some short-term systemic effects that are reported by people, and not everyone, but reported frequently, including things like achiness of the joints or of the muscles. A small number of people had fevers, but these things generally went away within a day or two. Probably the most notable thing that you may have heard about, if there have been some severe allergic reactions, and those allergic reactions may be related to one of the components of the vaccine. We, in conjunction with CDC, our colleagues, were looking into this further. The good news is that right now, it looks like those allergic reactions are happening on the order of 1 in 100,000 individuals or fewer. And they have been treatable, and we've actually required, as part of our FDA labeling, that any place that's giving the vaccine has to be able to treat such allergic reactions. So we're pretty comfortable that the vaccine is safe and effective. We're obviously monitoring this very closely. There is an adverse event monitoring. It's not one system, it's multiple overlapping systems that FDA has in collaboration with Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and with other agencies to look at potential adverse events, and we'll keep monitoring them. But right now, despite the fact that you might hear of an occasional event in the press, there's no new safety signal to report from the approximately 10, 12 million doses that have been deployed so far. So we're excited that we have these vaccines. The good news is that there are other vaccines on the horizon. We expect in the next month or two to hear information about possibly a one-dose vaccine, and there are others in phase 3 trials as well. So although clearly I wish that we could have gotten here sooner, at least we're starting to see the tools we need, the vaccines, to get us across the finish line, hopefully, with getting COVID-19 under control. I just would say that, just to finish up, that as we consider new vaccines, we're going to always make sure that the safety of these is foremost, and that we will be looking to make sure that these are highly effective vaccines, because we understand that that's what people will expect from vaccines here. So I just want to thank the commissioner again. He's been incredibly supportive through this, and thank my colleagues also at CDC, because they have been wonderful working with. Really, this has been the staff across government has worked together to help move this forward, and we'll look forward to getting more across the finish line. So I'll stop there and look forward to questions later. I think I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Hi. Great. Thank you, Dr. Markison, Commissioner Hahn. So I am going to reiterate everything that Commissioner Hahn and Dr. Marks have said already, but really focus a little bit more on the role of the CDC and the immunization program. I like to think of it as a baton, FDA. The baton, honestly, in a marathon, not a sprint, but FDA does an incredible job supporting the getting a vaccine authorized and reviewing all of the data to make sure that the trials have been rigorous and the vaccines are safe and effective before authorizing the vaccine. And at that point, it is handed off to CDC to work on implementing the vaccination program. The guiding principles that CDC has used throughout this effort have been to ensure equitable, fair, and efficient vaccination, and allow for flexibility at the jurisdictional level. Our goal, and I wish that we had enough vaccines to offer vaccines to the entire American public at the same time. But with these 2 new vaccines being authorized and manufactured at the same time, this happened much faster than ever before, but we did have a limited number of doses, and we still have a limited number of doses. So we are working tirelessly and diligently with our state and local partners to try to get vaccine in as many arms as possible, as quickly as possible, but also to prioritize vaccines and to try to ensure that the people who are most at risk from severe outcomes from COVID get vaccinated early. And the 2 key elements of how the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices and CDC have thought about how to determine who should get vaccines first are twofold. One are medical conditions and medical conditions that put individuals at increased risk for severe disease. And the data that we have seen is that older adults have suffered the most morbidity and mortality, particularly older adults living in long-term care facilities, where we've really seen devastating outbreaks. And so that is why the very first doses of vaccine were targeted towards those most vulnerable older adults. At the same time, there are people whose jobs put them at risk for exposure to COVID, and particularly frontline healthcare workers who have been treating patients who have COVID, who may be encountering patients who they don't know if they have COVID. So taking care of both COVID patients and patients for all of their medical conditions has been an enormous task on the healthcare community, as many of you know, for the past year. And so making sure that those individuals were protected early with vaccine was a priority. We have focused vaccine efforts in that group, in those groups for the last month. And I know we have delivered over 11 million people have started to get vaccinated, which is really amazing, although also in the context of this pandemic, not fast enough. And so we are doing more and more every day to make sure that we can increase the pace. We are limited by the number of doses that we're able to distribute. And for some, our current projections are about that there will be about each month we anticipate more doses being available. So the month of December, we had enough doses to vaccinate up to 20 million people. In the month of January, we anticipate that number being somewhere between 20 and 30, slowly increasing with these 2 vaccines that we currently have. And if we are able to, as Dr. Marks talked about, get a 3rd vaccine product or even a 4th on the market, that would drastically increase our ability to vaccinate this country as soon as possible. After these current groups that have been recommended for vaccines, the next large group of individuals are individuals with underlying health conditions, which I know that many of you are in that category. It has been on my mind throughout this process that these groups that we think about with underlying medical conditions, it feels like persons with living with rare medical conditions don't see themselves in this group. There is a CDC list of conditions that we've identified to put persons at increased risk. But I want to reassure you that that does not mean that we are leaving behind people who are not on that list. And in our guidance around who is considered at risk for COVID and should be vaccinated, we include both the CDC list, where we have evidence to support that persons with these very common medical conditions may be at increased risk. But right below that, we have language to say that we are unable to develop, we don't have the evidence to support, but we know that many rare conditions put individuals at increased risk for severe outcomes from COVID. And so we do want to make sure that all of you know that you are absolutely in that group. Really, any medical condition that where a person is either medically fragile, has any diminished ability in terms of their lung function, in terms of their neuromuscular function, to fight disease, particularly respiratory disease, all of those individuals should be considered for early vaccination. And I will end there and once again extend my thanks. I will just reiterate, this has been really a long journey that CDC and FDA have done really together. And we want to, all of us want to take care, end this pandemic and protect both populations that are living with chronic medical conditions and rare medical conditions, and also people who are at the forefront of this pandemic and putting their putting their lives at risk every day. Thanks.
Great. Thank you all so much. Those were incredibly informative presentations, and you have already answered a lot of the questions that we've collected thus far. As we move into our question and answer section, I just want to note a couple of things. We have a long list of questions that we have collected from the audience who had the opportunity to submit their questions during the registration process. We also worked with our partner organizations to collect the most common questions that they've been hearing about within their respective communities. So we hope that the questions we're going through are representative and responsive to the concerns of the communities. And we're going to try to get through as many of them as we can. We are also lucky enough to have our experts with us for the entire hour now until 3 o'clock, not until 2:45 as we originally planned. So we're going to try to get through as many of these as we can. Let me start with a question for Dr. Hahn or Dr. Marks. Dr. Marks, you mentioned the emergency use or EUA process. Can you speak a little bit more to that and discuss how it differs from full approval and when we should expect to see full approval of these vaccines?
Sure. So the normal approval standard for vaccines are approved under something called a biologics license application. And a biologics license application, like a new drug application, requires that there be a substantial evidence of effectiveness from adequate and well-controlled trials. Usually for a vaccine, that means a very large phase 3 study that's randomized, usually in thousands of people. Now, an emergency use authorization, the standard there, because it was developed after 9/11 to allow for medical products that might show efficacy in the treatment of serious conditions resulting from chemical, biological, or radionuclear threats, that it didn't require that same level of evidence as a new drug application or biologics license application, because it was realized that we might not be able to have the time to do that development, but there might be things that were on the shelf that could help people for treatments. But those are for treatments. Those are for treating people with a disease. Now, the standard there is the products may be effective, and the known and potential benefits have to outweigh the known and potential risks. That standard is you can see it's different. There's some error between that and substantial evidence of effectiveness from adequate and well-controlled trials. As we thought and really had a lot of discussions around vaccines for healthy people or for people who don't have a given disease, who maybe have other conditions, we realized that we wanted to have something for vaccines that was a higher standard than just may be effective. And because of that, our guidance made it clear that we would ask the trials to be large, well-controlled trials, just like they would have to be for a biologics license application, and that we would need them to enroll large, diverse populations, just like a biologics license application, and that there would be clear and compelling evidence of efficacy, which we would need for a vaccine, just like a biologics license application. The one difference is because we can't compress the duration of follow-up, we're not going to have the 1 year of follow-up that we often have when we approve a vaccine. But that's why we have safety surveillance in place. So the difference here between the biologics license and what we did with emergency use authorization is really, it's about the duration of follow-up that we have, and the fact that we didn't have to have all of the administrative work done in the biologics license that we normally would have. And we didn't have to go through reviewing all that extra stuff, which shaved a few months off of being able to get a vaccine out there during a terrible pandemic when every day counts.
Great, thank you, that's helpful. Another question for FDA. You mentioned in your opening remarks the remarkable level of the effectiveness rate, over 90%, which sounds impressive, but can you say a little bit more about exactly what that means? And does it have anything to do with the transmission of the virus? Do these vaccines, are they effective in preventing the transmission of the virus as well?
That's a great question. So the 95% effectiveness meant that compared to placebo, when the people who received placebo, there were 95% fewer cases of COVID-19 in those who were vaccinated, which is pretty impressive. And what was also impressive was, of those who did get COVID-19, there were very few vaccinated people who got serious COVID-19, if at all. There was, I think it was one case in one of the trials and none in the other of the trials. So it does seem to have very nice efficacy that way. They're really, this is kind of the big question. I don't know. It used to be called the $64,000 question, but corrected for inflation, it's probably $64 billion now. The real big question here is whether these vaccines will interrupt transmission from asymptomatic individuals, and we don't know that yet for sure. We know from animal studies that they appear to do that, but we won't until we have more data from human studies in real-world evidence and for some other studies that are planned. We don't know that for sure. That's the reason why we're telling people, even if you get vaccinated, you continue to wear your mask, social distance, and wash your hands, because we don't know whether it will control the spread yet.
Great, thank you. Let me move again, questions for FDA on the safety. Dr. Marks, again, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the sort of rare severe allergic reactions that you have seen, and you also mentioned the ongoing surveillance that both FDA and CDC are going to be doing to watch for additional safety signals, which is very helpful to know. Are there any large patient groups or conditions where you're seeing that there are true contraindications, or those patients who just should not get the vaccine at all? Vaccines?
Yeah, I'll let Amanda can probably comment some more on this, but from our perspective, really the only people that we would say definitely shouldn't get the vaccine are people who have a known, have had a known allergic reaction to any of the vaccine components. And obviously, if somebody has had an allergic reaction to a previous vaccine but doesn't know that they're allergic to any of these components, they need to tell their healthcare provider before they get the vaccine, because the CDC has put out guidance about how to watch people after they get the vaccine if they've had previous allergic reactions. So if you have had allergic reactions to any medicine or a vaccine, you should tell your healthcare provider when you go to get the vaccine. But aside from being allergic to one of the actual components of the vaccine, there's no absolute contraindication to getting the vaccine. Probably if you are actually sick with COVID-19, we wouldn't recommend you get the vaccine until after you were better. But that's pretty much the party line. And if Amanda probably can amplify on that if I've missed something.
No, not at all. The only thing I'll add to what Dr. Marks said is I know that, vaccine is being given in different places. And so you're unlikely to be getting your vaccine right now from your regular doctor. But we have also put out very clear and robust guidance about all of the administration sites. And in the very rare case you do have an allergic reaction, all of the administration sites have the capabilities to manage allergic reactions. And additionally, there are, at all of the administration sites, everyone is watched for a certain period of time. And if you have a history of allergic reactions, severe allergic reactions, we recommend waiting 30 minutes after vaccination at the sites so that if you do have any symptoms, it can be treated right away.
Great. And Dr. Cohn, if I can just stay with you for a couple of questions here. You mentioned the advisory committee recommendations that have come out thus far. And I think that was very comforting to so many of those on the call to hear that the rare disease community is contemplated in those recommendations. Can you say a little bit more about what is done with these recommendations? What is the meaning of the recommendations, and what is the CDC's process or the advisory committee's process for developing these recommendations?
Sure. So the advisory committee on immunization practices in many ways mirrors the FDA Vaccine and Related Biologics Committee, but whereas they provide guidance to FDA about the safety and effectiveness and of the products, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices provides recommendations and advises CDC on how to best use the products. So, for example, you can use the example of a heart medication. The FDA would decide which heart medications are safe and effective, and then a different group, more of a clinical recommendations group, which is what ACIP is, tells you you should take this one if you have this kind of heart, this bad of heart disease, and then you should try that one next. So for deciding who should get vaccinated, the ACIP met several times and used a new framework for COVID vaccines because prioritization we knew this was going to be such a hard and challenging recommendations to make. So we used an ethical framework that took into consideration various aspects of equity and described some of the different types of data, which included not only data about the safety and effectiveness of vaccines, but also information that we'd gathered about people's values and people's perspectives on prioritization and how to best recommend vaccines in the setting of limited doses. What I will say is that we provide recommendations to jurisdictions, but we talk about how patients could be prioritized, but allocations, which is what I think a lot of people are concerned about and hearing about, is how many doses each jurisdiction actually gets. So each state or tribal nation or local health department gets to provide to their population. And what you'll see is that we are a very, we have a lot of diversity in our country. And so jurisdictions do have some flexibility in how to best serve their populations and their communities. And so they may adapt ACIP recommendations. We're trying to provide a framework for more granular decisions about who gets doses when they're available. So you will see some jurisdictions, for example, have already gone down to age 65. Some are starting at age 75. And a lot of this has to do with demand and supply in those jurisdictions. And we were really trying to balance it so that we would ensure that there would not be more people who were recommended to get a vaccine during that time than there were doses available. We didn't want there to be long waits and long lines to get it. So we were really trying to tell people where in line we thought they should be, so that people who should get the vaccine earlier didn't get at the back of the line. And in the end, when you put that into practice, it's just incredibly challenging to do on a day-to-day basis because the demand and the supply is both unanticipated, it's hard to forecast, and this is one of the reasons why on a day-to-day basis, it can feel like, there's too long of a line here, or there's all these extra doses that aren't being given here. We did our best to forecast and try to anticipate where demand and supply would be needed, but we're trying to make adjustments right now. And so those adjustments will be made. And as we have more supply, we'll have more ability to, we need more money in our bank account so that we can, spend, put out vaccine into more places and make it more available.
Great, thank you. And just as a follow-up, do you have suggestions or information about where members of the rare disease community can go to find out information about how they can get the vaccine, where to get it, when they can get it? What's the best place they should be going to get that information?
Yeah, so the best place to go is to your state health department website. There are, on the CDC website, we do have a link that will take you to, your health department website. But if you just Google whatever state you live in and Department of Health, a COVID vaccine, that typically will get you to that webpage. And I've looked at several of these health department websites, and they vary in terms of how developed they are and how clear they are. Most of them are quite helpful. I think the hardest challenge is if you know that it's time for you to go get it, how do you get it? And I think that's where the challenge lays. So they can give you a list of pharmacies and a list of health department clinics and stuff where you can get it. And absolutely, I would say that any of you who are connected to a large healthcare system, look towards that healthcare system as well, because they're very connected and working in close contact with the health department. And many of those health systems will be getting doses to provide to their high-risk populations. So those are the two places I would recommend. But I will say that at least in Georgia right now, I know that people are having to refresh their web pages to make an appointment. It's not like flu vaccine where we would typically just say, go stand in line and get your vaccine. We want people to have appointments because we want for this to be, we know they're safe. They're very safe vaccines. We want them to be given safely as well and in a socially distanced way, which is absolutely adding to the complexity of the program, but is really important. So those are the two places I would recommend you go.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Let me shift back to some questions for FDA now. One of the most common questions we got through our registration portal and through our partner organizations is, what information is there about these vaccines with respect to patients with rare diseases? And Dr. Hahn and Dr. Marks, you both touched on this. Sort of the difficulties of studying any one condition in the short time period that we had around the COVID-19 vaccines. But can you say a little bit more about what do we know about individuals with rare diseases and their ability to safely get these vaccines?
So I'm happy to chime in here. I mean, the issue is we did not have enough people with rare diseases that were entered into these studies and studied in any systematic way. And there were only some people who had immunocompromised that were entered into the studies. So where we are, and I think our feeling at FDA here is that this is a choice that one needs to make with their individual provider. I think we're not concerned with, particularly with these mRNA-based vaccines, that there is going to be harm from giving it to somebody who is immunocompromised or who might have another condition. The question is, will it be as effective? And we simply don't know. That being said, I guess just in terms of practical advice, even if there's some decrement in efficacy, which we don't know there will be, the benefit risk here in the setting of COVID-19, which particularly for people with respiratory illness or any kind of respiratory compromise or diabetes, et cetera, can be very, very severe. The benefit may outweigh the risk, but it's one to have with your individual provider to understand, at least from the FDA point, we don't feel like there's a safety concern. It's a matter of really understanding whether you understand that it may not be quite as effective, but we don't know that. It could be, but we just don't know. So it's an individual discussion.
Thanks. And do you, FDA, Dr. Marks or Dr. Hahn, have recommendations for one of the vaccines over the other for the rare disease community?
Both. They're fine. Just whichever you can get a hold of. Okay. These are for all intents and purposes. Although yes, the side effect profile might be very slightly different. For all intents and purposes, these are very similar vaccines. The schedule is very similar: 3 weeks versus 4 weeks. One can say that we've now seen allergic reactions with both of them, and I can't say that one's better than the other. So I think right now, whatever you can get in your arm in a timely manner, that's the vaccine that's the best. And I don't know, Dr. Cohn, you're free to comment as well, but I think that.
No, I would say the exact same answer. We do recommend that you get the same product for the second dose once you've gotten the first dose, but you should also have, hopefully when you get that first dose, you'll come away with an appointment for your second dose. So that should be taken care of.
Great, thank you. Another question, probably for FDA, is on the issue of the interaction of gene therapies with these COVID-19 vaccines. Many in the rare disease community are hoping for access to gene therapies in the not so distant future. Is there any concern that these mRNA vaccines may cause antibodies to develop that could interfere with future or current access to gene therapies?
Great question, and we've answered it before, so I can answer it here. These mRNA vaccines are mRNA molecules that are packaged essentially in a soap bubble, and the soap bubble is not like one of the viruses, the adeno-associated virus that's being used for directly administered gene therapy, nor is it like any of the other vectors that are being used. There's the likelihood of something happening here where one of these vaccines would preclude you from getting a gene therapy is pretty much non-existent. So there should be no concern in terms of getting this vaccine and having it preclude you from getting a gene therapy. And I'm just going to answer another question at the same time. If you are on a gene therapy trial, you should check with your provider because these are considered considered unapproved products because they're under an emergency use authorization. They're not investigational products, and so many protocols will still let one get vaccinated unless there's a specific reason why you shouldn't, and that could be, I guess, in the protocol. But there should be no reason why, if you're on a gene therapy protocol, you shouldn't be able to get vaccinated, but just check with your provider in that regard.
Great, thanks. Another question probably for FDA. Some in the rare disease community may actually be unable to take the vaccine in its current injectable form. For certain rare diseases, intramuscular injections can exacerbate a patient's underlying conditions. For example, one rare disease called FOP, at the site of the intramuscular injection, there can actually be bone growth at the actual site. Are there additional dosage forms or routes of administration that are under development for these vaccines or any others in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for this one, you'd probably have to have a real conversation with, that would be a conversation that a provider would want to have, because I'm not sure, I mean, giving these subcutaneously is not something that's been studied. On the other hand, there are additional vaccines under development which can potentially be given subcutaneously. So within a few months' time, there should be some that could be given where we'll have more information on the safety and the efficacy of giving them subcutaneously. Although most of these vaccines are, to be honest, being studied in the intramuscular route. It's just that some of the vaccines are on platforms that have been used subcutaneously when necessary. Just the mRNA platform, we don't have that experience the same way.
Okay, thanks. Another question is related to children. As you all know, many rare disease patients are under 16. What do we know about the use of these vaccines in kids under 16? Are pediatric clinical trials underway, and when can those under 16 expect to have access?
So thanks, great question. So we have a little data with the Pfizer vaccine in 12 to 15-year-olds where the vaccine appeared to be safe. but it was not a very large data set. So they're now going back, and their trials will be underway for both of the mRNA vaccines as well as for future vaccines in the pediatric age range. They will start with ages 12 to 15. Once they make sure they're safe in those age range, they will then age de-escalate to 7 to 12-year-olds, and then age de-escalate below 7-year-olds. We just need to make sure that each time we're not so much worried about getting an effectiveness signal here, because we're going to look for antibody formation. So we'll look at what are immune correlates of protection in children. Or at least antibody responses to start. But what we need to make sure that there's safety and that we don't see any kind of inflammatory syndromes due to giving the vaccine and then getting the virus or vice versa. So that's why we can't just, some people said, well, why can't you just, it's good enough for adults, why can't you just half the dose and give it to children? We just can't do that, because we have to, A, we have to find the right dose, and B, we need to make sure it's safe. But it's probably, in the crystal ball, we're probably a couple of months away from being able to have it administered to 12 to 15-year-olds. And probably, I hope maybe by summertime, we'll have data so that it can be administered to younger children, although that's still, I have to say that with a lot of wiggle room. Depends on how things will go.
I'll just add to that quickly that we've gotten the question a lot about parents of caregivers of children who have either chronic medical conditions that may place them at increased risk get vaccinated. And while that language is not specific, of course they're recommended to get vaccinated. It goes back to that question of when. We don't have that group explicitly, but in a very similar way, I would absolutely recommend you talk to your healthcare provider and see if you can get vaccine earlier. It makes a lot of sense on an individual level for parents to consider that. It's just, there were so many different variables. It was hard to tease it out into that those different types of groups.
Thanks, Dr. Cohn. And that actually leads into another question for you that we got from many people related to caregiver access, but also just for anyone it lives in a state where they are sort of strictly complying with the words of the CDC recommendations. How can an individual physician advocate for a member of the rare disease community, whether it be a patient or a caregiver, to get access to the vaccine in these earlier groups in those states?
So, I think that there has been a lot of guidance over the last week, and we are continuing to reiterate from CDC that we don't want these recommendations to be so rigid that A, you're not getting vaccines in arms, or B, you're not vaccinating people who clearly, should be vaccinated early. And so I do think that this messaging will help. That's kind of new messaging really this week, as we started to realize that there was a real difference in flexibility that states were allowing. Honestly, I'm really also hopeful that in the next couple of weeks, there will be this rush with the older age groups, this demand that's been created by opening up to older age groups will even out a little bit, and that if somebody can't get access to it this week, I would recommend that they circle back around next week and the week after. I do think that things will shift over time.
Great, thanks. Another question that we saw a lot is the impact of what we've all heard about with the emerging different strain of COVID-19. For both FDA and CDC, what do we know about that strain, and are the vaccines that are currently available expected to be protective against them as well?
Yeah, so this is Peter. I can start with this. So we know that the United Kingdom, there are now multiple strains. So I don't think we should talk about strain, it's strains. And we know that the United Kingdom strain appears, although it's it has a higher rate of spread, it appears to be covered by the current vaccines that are out there. More troubling is a South African variant, which may be less well covered. I say may because we don't yet fully know. And there's a lot of investigation going on right now into whether that is as well covered by the current vaccines. And I wish I could tell you the answer to that right now. If Dr. Cohen has more information on it, the last I heard as of a few hours ago, I was on a call, was that they were still trying to get more information. I do think that you have to understand the public health agencies here. Now we're not going to be caught flat-footed, though. We understand that we're going to have to be watching very closely here because it is possible that this virus could change enough that we may have to cycle back and change the vaccine some. And no one should be like panicked if that has to happen. We're ready. We have the pathways to do it. It's not going to require a whole big 6-month trial again, 4 to 6 month trial. It's going to require a much more expedited process if we have to do it. But people are on the lookout for this. I hope it doesn't happen, just so you know. But what I think we've learned, all of us living in COVID-19 this year, is that we have to just prepare for the unexpected. That's probably a larger lesson in life from this year, but that's for another time. Prepare for the unexpected, but we are prepared, and I think this is another great partnership between the Centers for Disease Control, FDA, and other federal partners, NIH, in really keeping track of this so that we're really on top of this and we don't get behind the curve. Amanda, did you have anything you want to add?
No, I was just thinking the same thing. We are looking at every possibility all of the time. We are rapidly, every time we learn something new, we are following up on it. But at this time, we really don't have anything new related to vaccine protection in these new strains.
Great. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. I just want to reiterate our heartfelt appreciation to all of you for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedules to join us here. This information has been just invaluable, and we really appreciate your time here today and your hard work on behalf of the rare disease community and the country overall. So thank you so much. Peter, I think I can turn it back to you to briefly close us out.
Rachel, thank you. I just want to thank all of our guests and say, you said it very well. Thank you all sincerely for what you do, what you've done so far, and thank you for giving us time out of your schedule this afternoon. Very informative webinar, lots of really good information, and we hope that we're on the downhill slope now. And again, we'll say thank you to everybody. Thank you to our partners for helping us put this on. And we anticipate doing more of this for you, the community, throughout the rest of this year of 2021. So thank you all today. Have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you.